Well, Mrs. Burgum, you could easily introduce Governor Burgum at presidential campaign events without talking about your personal struggles with addiction. So why did you make the decision to bring up this issue on the presidential campaign trail?
Well, I've been actually talking about it for over 6 years now. I didn't get help for 20 years with my struggle with my addiction to alcohol. And I had been in recovery for 15 years when I became First Lady, and I didn't talk about it either because of the shame and stigma. And then someone said that the easiest, fastest, cheapest way to eliminate stigma is just to talk about it, to normalize the conversation around the disease of addiction. You know, really normalize the conversation around behavioral health, which is just health. And so then when he came home and said, I'm thinking about getting in the presidential race, it was sort of natural for me to just continue that conversation. And especially now, I mean, I believe we're having a behavioral health crisis across our nation. And so to have that opportunity when we're talking to people everywhere to talk about why it's so important to eliminate the stigma of addiction just by talking about it, you know, I'm just going to spread the word because, you know, there's just, people don't reach out for help because of the shame and stigma. People overdose because they lose their lives, you know, and so it's so important that we eliminate the stigma around this disease. It's a brain disease. It's not a moral choice or a, you know, moral character flaw, you know, it's a disease.
And so describe your relationship with alcohol when you were battling addiction.
My relationship with alcohol, yeah. So, well, I was a blackout drinker from when I was in high school. So my introduction to alcohol was, you know, full on right in the minute I, you know, took my first drink, really. So, and then from there, as someone who has an addiction, you know, it just had a complete hold over my life, you know, but it is a brain disease. So it's, you know, the alcohol is really the symptom, but you're trying to have a coping mechanism for other things that aren't working in your life, usually behavioral health, mental health related. And for me, that was the case. As a young person in high school, I had all kinds of friends, and I was in honor society, and I was playing tennis. You know, I just had sort of looked like I had it all, but there were a lot of days I didn't want to get out of bed when I was in high school, but I couldn't really figure out why. And my family is very Scandinavian, so, you know, I'm basically a Viking. And we didn't sit around the table and talk about our feelings. You know, we were warriors and explorers, and, you know, you just, you know, my heritage is, you know, sort of just suck it up and get it done, you know. So I just didn't reach out for help, didn't have anybody, just was never going to talk about the issues in my life that were more depression or anxiety. So drinking, I thought, was nirvana. I thought that was like the solution until, you know, it was a 20-year struggle trying not to drink. And, you know, so my relationship with alcohol was really my way of coping with untreated mental health issues.
And how did you eventually become sober and stick with it? I know you said that you relapsed often. So what ultimately led you to the journey you're on now?
Yeah, the 8 year, well, lots of years of saying I was going to stop. You know, really pretty consistently an 8-year relapsing struggle. Which, as I think about now, I'm like, oh, how did I get through that? Like, how did I, you know, but for me, it was, you know, well, a couple of things. One, I mean, I would say when I first decided to go to treatment, I actually talked to my team leader at work. And, you know, I was like so nervous to even bring it up, you know, like, how am I going to, she's just going to think I'm a loser. There's going to be judgment. There's going to be disdain, you know. And so I had lunch with her, and I just said, you know, hey, I'm really struggling and I need to go to treatment. And I looked up at her and she had tears in her eyes. You know, she had all kinds of empathy when I thought she was just going to judge me and just be like, oh my gosh. And that was super helpful because that helped me begin that process. I didn't stay sober after that because I, really I wasn't surrounding myself with people that were like me. The disease of addiction is a very isolating disease. And so I wasn't, once I found a group of people that were like me, that, were supporting each other, then that was much easier to, find that path and stay sober, because I had people that I could connect with who had the same struggles I did. And so that's really, the other part of it was that I was out walking one day. I didn't have I wasn't part of organized religion. I knew there was something, greater than me out there. I knew there was a God. And I just was like, hey, I don't know if there's anybody out there or if anyone can help me, but I need help. And I have been sober since I uttered those words. So that was like a miracle for me, So, it was a combination of a few things. My team leader who helped me get started, and, the people that I needed to be around that were like me, and also this, this miracle that happened in my life.
I've heard you talk about, like you just said, having blackouts, getting arrested for a DUI, being suicidal. Why do you think it's important to be so specific when you do talk about your struggles?
Well, because I think that it helps people who have the same issues, or who it helps because it helps eliminate the shame, I think. Because, people will say, wow, well, I've done that too, and, she seems to be doing pretty well. And so maybe if I just confront this and, ask for help, I can find my way. Because, there's always hope for recovery. So it doesn't really matter what you've done, whether you've been in the criminal justice system or whatever. There's just always hope for recovery, so that, every day can be a better day in people's lives, and they can become, happier and have families and jobs. But mostly I just really try to focus on that there's always hope for recovery.
What kind of response have you seen from voters on the presidential campaign trail?
Well, before I came in here today, my husband recognized me in the crowd as someone who was in recovery, and a person pulled me aside backstage and said, congratulations, I've been in recovery for this long. And so, it's so, I just am so grateful that there are people like that want to, talk about their recovery and want to, if I'm doing anything to inspire people to share their stories, then, I'm just grateful for the opportunity. It happens all the time. After I introduce my husband, but I share a little bit about my story and my struggle, at almost every single event and every single stop, someone will say either they lost someone to an overdose or that they're struggling, and I give out my phone number to everyone who asks for it, because, I feel like that's the gift. I've been given this gift, and I need to help other people, and I want to help other people. So, the response is that more people are trying to get over the shame and stigma and just start talking about it or reaching out for help. But it just also is such a view into how fentanyl is destroying so many lives in our country, how synthetic meth and fentanyl are preventing people from the opportunity there's just no intervention opportunity. The way those drugs really impact people prevents them from even reaching out for help. They'll freeze to death on the street. They'll do all these things versus reaching out for help. And so the synthetic fentanyl that's coming from China, that it's just devastating people's lives and communities. And we just have to, first of all, we have to treat it differently, and we have to approach things differently. There's, I think there's some really smart people right now that are utilizing the opportunity when people do get in the criminal justice system because of their addiction. They're using that opportunity in jails even to have an intervention and start providing treatment to people, and I think that's a really good idea. I'm not in favor of, making harsher laws or necessarily even incarcerating people, but if they do end up there, that's maybe the only opportunity you have to provide an intervention and start helping people, because they won't raise their hand, because the struggle of addiction and the brain disease just has such a strong hold on people.
Do you, on that note of how widespread this is, do you think this issue is being talked about enough on the campaign trail and being talked about in the right way?
Well, I think there's a lot of focus on fentanyl, but I don't think there's enough focus on what needs to be done with behavioral health. So there's still a ton of stigma in healthcare around brain health, mental health, the disease of addiction. I don't think there's enough focus on those kinds of things. I don't think there's enough focus on the solutions, like some of these things we're doing in North Dakota. 50% of our state's rural, and we're never going to have all the services we need for helping people. And I sort of say to people that, in North Dakota, every small town has a church and a bar, and the bar gets a lot of business, and the church could use more business. And a lot of people, like in the church communities, want to provide more help, and it's a great opportunity for them to do things like these statewide programs that we have called peer support specialists, and so. This program for us has been huge. We have 1,000 people trained across our state that are helping people in every community across our state. That's a program that could be a national program, because every state has the same roadblocks that we do, the same issues. There's not enough people to provide the services. There's not enough facilities. There's not enough people asking for help. But we can standardize this peer support specialist program across the nation. And people who come out of the criminal justice system, the peer support specialists have lived experience. They want to help other people. And guess what? They can't get a job because they have a felony, because we legally discriminate against people. It just makes me so sad for the rest of their lives, because, they have a felony that was related to their addiction. So if they can have a career now as a peer support specialist and help all these people from a behavioral health specialist, it's an incredible program that we're doing in North Dakota, and it can easily be a program that we have across the nation.
You have talked about the need to celebrate recovery. What does celebrating recovery look like for you?
Yeah, I get emotional about that too. I don't know why, but well, I know why, because thank God I have it, because I would not be here today, without my recovery. So, I used to go through my life crying about, I was a victim of everything, and, my life was a mess and blah, 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 but it was never my fault. Now when I get emotional, it's just because I'm full on grateful, for what I have in my life and for my recovery. So celebrating it is just so important, and celebrating it by talking about that there's always hope for recovery, recognizing people, recognizing companies that are creating recovery supportive workplaces, I've even been at like community events, like Chamber of Commerce events, and whenever I give talks, I always talk about how important it is to, normalize the conversation. So I've been at some of those events, and I've said, hey, if you're comfortable, it'd be great if you would stand with me as a person in recovery, at a kind of a business event, and people do that, and their coworkers they've worked with for 15 years didn't know, they were in recovery. So recovery, because I think sometimes people have these stereotypes of what someone looks like who's in addiction. But, recovery can look just like you and me. Like, you don't know who's in recovery and who's not in recovery, because they're just people living normal lives because they never gave up hope and they found recovery. Yeah.
Well, I've learned so much from Kathryn about the disease, and understanding that addiction is a brain disease. And we've got to do, as a country, more research. I mean, this is a disease that affects so many people. There's every family, every community, every company is touched by this. And of course, now with the advent of all the fentanyl coming in across the southern border and us losing 300 people a day to overdose deaths in this country, it's become even more urgent. And it's not a partisan issue. This isn't addiction doesn't care what political affiliation you have. It doesn't care whether you're rich or poor. It touches everybody, and we've made it a priority in North Dakota. But the real catalyst for that has been Kathryn's courage. I mean, her courage to stand up and share her story has been a complete game changer, and it's not only changed lives, I know it's saved lives in our state.
How have you seen voters on the presidential campaign trail respond to Mrs. Burgum sharing her story, and what has that meant to you?
Well, I would have to say some of the most powerful moments of our campaigning have come when Kathryn, as she does at our campaign stop, she shares her story. And when she shares her story, I mean, if we're in a group, no matter how small it is, the probability that someone's going to come up afterwards and share with her that someone in their family has been struggling with the disease of addiction, their personal experience, or sadly the stories of people who've lost a family member because of a fentanyl poisoning and overdose. And we've had those stories have been shared by parents as well. And so it's both heartbreaking, but it's also inspirational because people will come up to her and say, hey, I'm also in recovery, but I don't talk about it. And she encourages them, and when they're ready to share their story, because by talking about it's one way we can eliminate the shame and the stigma. And so every day is a joy to be with her because like I said, she's changing lives and saving lives everywhere we go.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.